Hi, my name is Melissa Maher, and I'm an Associate Director of Grants and Contracts at Harvard Medical School. Today, I'll be talking about best practices for contracting and research administration, in particular, drafting clear contracts. So the goal is a clear contract that people outside of the negotiation can understand easily. So why is this important? First, administration. It's likely that other people or teams in your organization may need to read the contract in order to administer it or set it up. For example, they may need to enter information into a system of record, or they may need to just facilitate compliance with the terms and conditions, like setting up invoicing or progress reporting. There may also be a need to interpret the contract several years into the project when, for example, the negotiators who originally made the agreement are gone or unavailable for some reason, and people need to be able to decide how to proceed under the contract. For example, is a cost allowable, or does a change require prior approval? There may also be an audit or litigation situation. So an auditor may review the contract to ensure that your project is complying with the terms and conditions that you've agreed to, or you may be involved in a lawsuit where you may need to make an argument about what the parties intended, and you want that to be clear so that you can hopefully be successful. So how can we ensure that our contracts are clear? First, we want to review them for accuracy and clarity. I would recommend creating and maintaining standardized templates that you can use for common situations that come up very frequently. It's important to review your templates periodically and update them as needed so that they're current and that they match current guidelines, processes, policies, regulations, rules, and all of that. I also suggest to use formatting like bolding or highlighting to call out action items in the template, like blanks that need to be filled in, or optional or alternative language that may or may not be included depending on the project. It's also important not to blindly complete the template, so make sure to go through and just ensure that all of the terms are appropriate and tailored to your specific project and situation. I would also recommend using plain, straightforward language. It's really not necessary to include fancy legal terms or legalese. Just plain language that describes what the parties have agreed to is perfectly fine and is usually clearer. Also, you want to go through and clean up the template before you send it out. So just make sure that you're deleting, for example, instructions to the drafter or comments that are meant for internal purposes. Make sure you filled in any blanks and so forth. In addition, you want to ensure that the basic project details are clear and correct. So making sure that the parties' names, period of performance, budget and payment information, reporting requirements, and so forth are all accurate and correct. This is really important if you're using a template or old agreement. You want to make sure that you've gone through and updated any references. So if you have an agreement for University A that you're adapting for University B, you just want to make sure to change all of those references to University B. As I referenced earlier, you also want to make sure that prior approval requirements are very clear. So what changes do require prior approval, what changes don't require it, and for those that do, what is the process? Who do you ask for approval? How do you ask? Can approval be granted through email, through an amendment, and so forth? Finally, you just want to facilitate easy setup of the award or the agreement. So as you're drafting and reviewing the contract, think about what information will be needed in order to set it up in your systems, what that process looks like, and make sure the necessary information is included and is correct. The second thing that we can do to ensure that our contracts are clear is review for good structure and internal consistency. So I think if used really well, that section headings can be just really helpful in terms of creating a bit of a roadmap for the contract to help direct people of where to find the information that they need very quickly. We also want to use defined terms correctly. So ensure that defined terms are capitalized and also ensure that any terms in the agreement that are capitalized are either a defined term or a proper noun so that it isn't confusing. I would also recommend picking one format for defined terms. It can be whatever you like. It can be quotes, bold, underline, etc., but just pick one and be consistent with that throughout the entire agreement. You also want to make sure that the defined terms are used appropriately and consistently throughout. So make sure that, for example, you don't define the same term twice in two different places and define them differently. and make sure that when you use those terms, they make sense within the context of the agreement. You also want to check for accurate section references. So this is especially important if you're using a template where you may be deleting or adding a section that can throw off the whole numbering of the contract. So just make sure that you're updating any references so that you're pointing someone to the correct section for information. And you want to make sure that the sections are in the correct order, that none are missing and none are duplicated. So you don't want two section 12s, and you also don't want to jump directly from section 11 to section 13. It's also important to confirm the correct exhibits. So if your contract is referencing exhibits, just make sure that those are actually included and make sure that they're correct and that they match what the exhibit is described as. If you have to leave in references, but you're not actually going to have the exhibit, just make some kind of a notation that makes it clear, like intentionally omitted. That way it avoids confusion. And finally, you want to go through your entire contract and just make sure that everything makes sense. Make sure everything is consistent and that there aren't any inconsistencies or contradictions throughout the terms. Try to avoid duplicative terms where you're addressing the same thing in multiple places if you don't need to do that, because that just introduces the possibility for errors. With that, I would like to say thank you for watching and happy contracting.